There. Hi guys, sorry for the slight delay. Nowadays doing all these things, technology, Wi-Fi, data, all these things can make it sometimes difficult, but here we are. So for today I'm making a Steak Diane. So yes, we're celebrating Bastille, and for those of you that are sort of like food historians, you probably know Steak Diane is not strictly a French dish, didn't originate there, but definitely a lot of elements in terms of taking some of the techniques that was learned, that the French basically taught us, whether it's sauteing, flambeing, all those type of techniques are used in this dish. Where it originated from, it's kind of sketchy. People, if you read up about it, they're talking about New York, London, even Australia is mentioned. For those of you that know it, you'd know that in restaurants it's normally served tableside. Back in the day, like what we've seen even more recently, people are doing it sort of flambeing as like a tableside, a bit of entertainment to see what's happening, how sort of like the dish comes together, almost like crepe Suzette. Apparently that was quite famous in the 20s. Anyway, I'm gonna run you through some of the ingredients. I think for those of you that got the recipe, I did adjust it slightly. I mean, it's really about finding certain ingredients and stuff that I couldn't find. The gist of it though is Steak Diane is cooked in the pan, and then you use the pan juices to make your sauce. There's some flambeing involved, and that means there's alcohol involved, which is great. I'm using a combination of brandy and some red wine, and I've got some of this Nomu stock just to give it some base flavor as well. It's not completely necessary. I've added that, so it wasn't in the original recipe. And also the marrow bones, just in terms of limited time, I'm going to just cook them as is because they look so beautiful. I think they look great on the plate, so I'll just show you that technique of how I cook it instead of making the croquettes. So I've got the fillet, and I'm not portioning it into small little medallions. I'm going to try and roast it as is, so pan sear, and really why I'm doing that is because it's this size, it needs to be in the pan for quite some time, which means it will release some more of its sort of natural juices or roasting juices into the pan, which will obviously then help us to get that nice deep flavor in our sauce, where medallions will be in there for a very short time, and you just won't get enough of that sort of natural meat juices. Okay, and then the herbs I'm using, in restaurants we love using fresh thyme. This comes out of my garden, my Italian parsley. This is just nasturtiums for garnish. I mean, just if you want, it's free. It grows all over the place. And then I'm going to be making some potato fondants. It's basically a fancy sort of like roast potato, if you can call it that. And the idea is that it soaks up all the butter. That's definitely French. I mean, they love cooking with butter. So it's a slow process of cooking it. Your recipe there says just the butter. I mean, that goes on low temperature, so I'm going to add the butter and a bit of water just to allow it to cook. Now this is the thing, the water is not going to take away flavor because it's going to evaporate, and it's going to allow the potato to cook quicker. And then once the water evaporates, it's back to the butter, and the butter will just give it the color and that nuttiness. Okay, so I'm going to start by putting some of these onions in the oven. And so the idea is to get those, the roasted onion petal, the look of it, and of course the taste. I'm going to cut it again just to save on a bit of time. And you know what? I'm not going to add oil to this pan. It's a roasting tray, but I'm not going to add any oil. I will add a bit of salt. Now, I think this is something people don't do a lot, where they cook. They always have to add oil. But when you do, like, especially root vegetables that's still in their skin. It's really nice just to put them in the oven without using oil, because the skin sort of like protect it, and that kind of toasty flavor is what really makes it delicious. So this goes straight into the oven, and I've preset it to about 200 so I can adjust it as I go along. About 20 minutes, and then I'll get on to the potatoes, because this also takes a bit of time. But before I do that, I've got some water going, boiling, so I'm going to add some salt to it. I'm going to be quite generous with the salt because I'm adding the marrow bones in there, and sometimes you can actually let it lie in salt water to almost cure it a little bit. So this is going to go in there for, say, roughly 5 to 8 minutes. I don't need all of that, but I mean, it's nice to have leftovers that you can enjoy later again. So that's in there. Then the potatoes. I've got my little pan here. You don't need to use a non-stick pan, just a thick based pan would be great. So I've cut the potatoes sort of like in this rectangular shapes. You can do round, you know, our potatoes don't come sort of like in, we want them to come sort of like in these abnormal shapes, I know. So to cut them into rectangular shapes, you are going to get some offcuts. Obviously you can make some mash with those, or use them in soups or whatever. So I'm just going to cut the sides off like so. I think I'm going to just do 4 of these. Yeah, and then I'll shape them. So the idea is that you really try and get them all the same sort of thickness, because you want them to cook evenly and in the same time. You know, if you have some of them that's too thick, it might just take a little bit too long or longer than the others. Whenever we cook with unsalted butter. I mean, you can cook with salted butter, but you know, then you basically have to start adjusting your seasoning as you go along. So unsalted, and being sort of Bastille, it's not just because of that. Actually, I love butter, so I'm not going to just say it's because of Bastille. It's because I really love butter, and I love it when it goes with potatoes especially, so I'm using a lot of it. Okay, potatoes goes on top, and some salt. And then one thing I really love using is white pepper. You can use black pepper, but I kind of like the flavor of the white pepper. And yes, that's a lot of white pepper. But like I mentioned, I like the flavor of it. And then I'm going to add some water. Okay. And now I just want to get that going. So I'm going to start with high temperature, and then sort of like allow it to start cooking up, kind of boiling, and then I'll lower it as it goes, because you want the potatoes to cook. And if you do it sort of high temperature, the water will evaporate and just the potato won't get enough time to soften. So I'll start it here, and then I need some more space, and then I'll put it there at the back on the back stove. Okay, so let me just check on my marrow. So it's softening nicely. I need a roasting tray. And I just want to do my parsley sort of crust that I want to put on top. So just kind of like a rough chop. It doesn't need to be kind of too fine. Okay, and to that, just some zest. So as you can see, my potatoes, the butter's melted the water, so I'm just going to put it at the back. I'll show you sort of like once it starts to color what it looks like. Okay, and to my sort of like crust for the marrow bones, I'm going to add some lime zest. You can add some, to this you can add some garlic, you can add some anchovies, which is kind of maybe slightly different. Adds that nice kind of saltiness and depth of flavor. Okay, maybe we'll do a little bit of juice because obviously marrow bones are quite rich. So to kind of just bring out the flavor of it as well, you can add some juice. Not too much, just a little drop. Some breadcrumbs. Like that. Okay, so partly why I like to blanch these guys, the marrow bones, a little bit first is just to soften it. Okay, I basically want to cook it and then give it a bit of roasting in the oven, so it doesn't need to be in there too long. So it tends to be kind of oily if you just sort of like roast them off. You almost get rid of some of the oiliness if that's even possible, because the marrow is it is kind of fatty, but also very, very tasty, and that's why we like it. So you can see kind of they nice and soft now. So a lot of salt already in the water. I'll add like a little bit more salt, but not too much, and then just some black pepper. So we're done with this pan. Potatoes are looking good. Okay, so now I just want to do some black pepper. Tiny bit of salt again. Okay, and then just the crust. So look, I'm doing this to give flavor to the marrow bones. It will add a bit of texture to it as well, but you really don't need to add too much of it. All the flavors are in there. It's probably going to be in the oven. I won't put it in straight away because, like I mentioned, the marrows are already cooked, so it won't be in there for too long. And we still need to cook our meat, so I want to get this done as our meat is done and as our potatoes are done, and all this and the sauce, of course. Okay, so that's prepped, so we can leave that to one side there. Okay, get it out of the way. I'll just quickly check on our onions, and then also I'll bring the potatoes back in here. So that's kind of like on a well, it's a bit high now. I can put it slightly lower. So I'll allow it to sort of give color to the one side of the potato, then I'll flip it, add a bit more water, and then continue the cooking. Okay, so as you can see, these onions, basically they're starting to soften up a little bit. I'm just going to take the skin off because I want to give them a bit more color in the pan, so I'll use in my sort of pan just to give it a bit more of that kind of roasting color. And then maybe we'll put it back into the oven as well, just to soften up. Again, this is kind of like, it will give us flavor, but at the same time sort of like a nice look on your plate. I'm using a bit of olive oil. So now I want kind of like onions obviously got some sugar in it, so it will start to caramelize. It will start to stick to the pan, but you know, that's what I want. I want that dark color, so it's going to look like kind of almost burnt, but that's exactly sort of what I'm going for. Let's take this skin off, yeah. Okay, so time to season our meat. So salt and pepper. I mean, yes, you can do your steak rub and all that, but in this recipe we obviously want all that nice clean flavors. So basically like thyme, pepper, a lot of salt, quite a bit of black pepper. The recipe I also have is where we use pink pepper. It's, you know, in the restaurants we can find that easily at our suppliers. I couldn't find it in any of our shops here, so I'm using just black pepper. You can use whole white pepper as well, or even green pepper I think you can use. Okay. So that's nicely seasoned. I mean, there is this question where people are talking about, should you season before or after the time? I believe that if you season before the time, you get better flavor, sort of like development, and also it allows the meat to caramelize a little bit quicker, because the salt sort of like curing the surface of the meat a little bit, which allows it to sort of start to caramelize quicker than if you just season it straight into the pan without seasoning. Okay, so I'm going to turn the potatoes around quickly. So now you'll see they would have gotten some color. And basically soaking up some of that butter. I'll add a little bit more water. It's really a great smell, the thyme, butter, kind of nuttiness of the butter that you're getting, that flavor. It really smells awesome. So I'm going to press this down a little bit. The onions getting nice color now. I'm going to take them off once they've got that beautiful color, pop them back into the oven, and then I'll start cooking the steak. And I'm using some cream just to get some consistency. I'm also adding a little bit of butter, so it's quite rich. But the thing with tenderloin or with fillet, there's not a lot of fat on it, so I think you can allow a bit of richness today, especially on a cold day like today. Okay, let's look at them. Okay, so nice color. Now I'm going to flip them. I'm just going to put them like that into the oven. So we can start cooking our steak. And I'll start cooking our marrow bones. Okay, so what we have here, I still have my pan with a little bit of olive oil in there. We need some garlic, so I'm just going to add this to the pan as well. And I kept some more extra thyme that I'm also going to use to sort of like flavor the butter as we're roasting the steak. So I'm going to just crush it. This is just for flavor, so we won't use it. Normally when I do it, just before it really starts to burn that toasted flavor, I just eat it while I'm cooking. It's always delicious, but it's not really part of the recipe in terms of what we're going to serve it with. So in goes the garlic, the thyme, on steak. So that's kind of like medium high temperature. I'm going to add a tiny bit of butter as well. Now once you start to add butter, then you have to manage the sort of like the temperature of your pan. Obviously I want color, I want that nuttiness, but if you use sort of like high temperature, the butter will start to burn. You just want it to foam a little bit, so I'm going to just put it slightly lower. Like I said, I want it to be in there, in the pan for a little bit longer. I want that kind of like roasted, deep, sort of dark brown color on the meat before it goes into the oven. So as you can see, it's getting you get that foaming with the butter. That allows you to get that nice deep, kind of like nutty or deep dark brown color, but also that nutty flavor. I don't really like when you sort of give too much of a crust, especially when you do steak or fillets. I just want it very kind of like dark color, but not like too hard. You don't want to start cooking it in terms of getting it up to the temperature one. I'm going to do that medium rare. So I'm sealing it off nicely all over with a bit of color, and then it goes into the oven for about, I'm going to put the oven quite high, so about 10 minutes. Obviously it still needs to rest then. Okay. So if the steak goes into the oven, it gives us enough time to finish that sauce. So I'll have to chop some onions, some more garlic to go in that, and then I'll use some thyme again, just because I love it so much. But you can use tarragon. And in some sort of like Steak Diane recipes, you can use sherry as well. I'm just using brandy and some wine. Okay. Okay, steak goes into the oven. As you can see, sort of, it's getting there now. I want that bit of color there, so that's a bit of pre-cooking. I'll take it out quickly and then I'll just pop it in to heat it up a bit later on. Just reduce the temperature. So for my sauce, I think I probably don't need a whole onion, so let's use just quarter of this. Okay, so now we are gonna see some flames once I add the brandy, which is normal. I mean, it really goes without saying, you don't want to be too close to the pan when you start to flambe it. If you have long hair, it's maybe best just to tie it. I'm lucky because my hair is pretty short. Okay, so the recipe basically just asks for chopped onions, okay? But I'm gonna, like I mentioned, I do have some garlic here that's already in the pan. We are gonna strain all of that out afterwards. But it really adds a lot to the flavor. But I just want to do a little bit more butter. Can I just get a lighter quickly, please? Okay, my onions goes in the pan. It's kind of like medium high. I'll put it a little bit higher. Thank you very much. Some extra thyme. Some more pepper. I just want to soften that a little bit, get some of the stuff out of the way. My love, it keeps on falling. Okay, so I'm not after sort of like heavy roasting. This is basically just sort of what we call sweating the onions in the pan. So it's picking up some of that sort of meat flavor that's in the pan. So I want the onions to caramelize slightly. I mean, you want some of that sweetness to come out of the onions. So I'm not adding the brandy straight away. I want that process to start first. This is kind of like when they do it, kind of table side. The steak sort of finished off at the table. Then yes, what we want to see is that big flame. And you know, this people always talk about your sauce will only be as good as if you use wine, and it's the quality of the wine that you're using. So use some good Franschhoek wine, obviously, and if you can find a good Franschhoek brandy that's not too expensive, use that. But you know, I find that if it's a nice aged brandy, it does actually add quite a good base flavor to your sauce. Okay, so I'm going to add my brandy. Yes, it is quite a bit. Burn the alcohol off a bit. Some wine, red wine. And then I'm also adding some chicken stock. This is from Nomu. You can make a fresh one too. Just get those flavors to develop a little bit. Add some more water to my potatoes. Yeah, they're almost there. I think another sort of 5 minutes. I think my potatoes should be ready. I might just add a bit more butter to it. Okay. I just quickly want to taste before I add the cream. Okay, cream goes in. Just want to give that a quick stir. Got some more here. Okay, so I just want to pop in the marrow bone again, so you can see it's sort of like nice and soft. So I just want to again just heat it up, get that even more crispy. It's crispy as it is, but just to heat it up a little bit more. Onions are done. Okay, now all I want to do is just quickly strain off my sauce. And then what I like to do is still, I mean, I can add, for some green, you can add some broccoli. I mean, I've got some mushrooms, you can kind of roast it in the oven together with all the other components. But I just want to quickly get the sauce. Smells really great. I mean, yes, it is pretty rich, like I mentioned before, and you can add a bit more red wine to it as well, but you know, I mean, you're not gonna, the idea is not to reduce it too much, because if you reduce the wine too much, you'll have a sauce that's pretty acidic sometimes. So you just want to add it for flavor, so it just heats up, cook out the alcohol, and add the cream. Okay, so yes, I'm gonna add some more butter to this. I'm not gonna boil it too much, I just want to kind of melt it in there. So I want it nice and rich. And then we can check the seasoning. I think I'll add a tiny bit of salt. Doesn't really need too much of it. Actually doesn't need salt at all. It's perfect as is. What I will add is a bit more black pepper to it. So this is kind of like the consistency that you want. I don't think any of us like a thin sauce for your steak. I think you want something that sort of like coats the steak as you eat it. I mean, that's kind of like the idea. I like it that way. Okay, I think these potatoes are almost done as well. We're almost ready to plate up. So this is the marrow bone. What I'll do is I'll kind of sort of scoop out a little bit of it just to show you that you know, that's how quick it is to cook it. Get all this stuff out of the way. Okay. And use this one. So obviously, normally when a steak, especially meat, when you have it in the oven, the exact time that you have it in the oven, it needs to rest for that same time in a sort of like a warm place. Normally, fillet is a bit more forgiving than meat that sort of like contracts more, but I'm just going to cut it, let it rest like a minute or two, not the normal time. Cut it and then we'll sauce it up. It's still nicely medium rare. I mean, look at that. So I know you wouldn't normally do this, but I just can't let that go to waste. So just catch a bit of that sauce too. It's just flavor. You want flavor on top of flavor. Mouthfeel we like as well, obviously. Of our onions. I mean, I like kind of roasted onions, roasted garlic. So yeah, I'm putting quite a bit on it. I don't think we celebrate onions enough. You know, when they're nice and sweet and cooked nicely, they're just delicious. Potato. And then let me just rather spoon it, because normally, you know, I love sauces, so I I tend to put too much sauce on a plate, but just, I mean, I love a good sauce. So just to give it another whisk there. Okay, and just to, if you want to, make it a little bit pretty, you can add some of this, nasturtiums, and why not some more black pepper. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. It didn't take that long. I mean, it's a sauce, Steak Diane, you make it from scratch, nothing is pre-cooked. You can add green vegetables to it. I wanted to show you quickly what the marrow bone looks like inside, so you can just kind of scoop it out like that, and that's sort of like the consistency you get. You know, it's soft, it's cooked, it's got all the flavor that's in there, the lemon zest, the parsley and everything should go really beautifully with the sauce and the steak. So thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope there's something that you learned from this recipe. Surely you can always ask more if you need to know more specifics of it. But yeah, that's my Steak Diane for our Bastille week, and I hope there's a lot more recipes and ideas that you can get along the way. Thank you very much. Stay safe.